found an idea, or at least a verse in Scripture that's so powerful and so thought-provoking, so provocative, so intriguing, raise so many questions, and provide so many tantalizing angles on looking at the world, especially when coupled with what the Talmud says on this one verse and what the commentaries say on this one verse, that it's really something that it's important, I think, to study, and to study again and again, because it's so vital to shaping our spiritual lives. And it's a verse that we found actually in this past week's Parsha. As we know, the Torah Torah can mean a lot of things. Torah is the general idea of what God gave us, but in a more limited sense, the Torah is the 5 books of Moses. And every year, our communities worldwide read the entire Torah, the entire Scripture, beginning to end, beginning of Genesis to the end of Deuteronomy, to the end of Devarim. And it's broken into 54 different sections called a Parsha, even though on a technical term, the word Parsha does not mean a Parsha that we do every week. It's actually called a Sidra, but most people don't know that, so we just call it Parsha. Parsha means like a section or a paragraph, but it means a Torah section that we read every week. So colloquially, people say Parsha for what we read every week, even though it's really called a Sidra, but that's an aside. So this past week's Sidra, past week's Parsha, there is a verse that is very interesting and that I want to study not only the verse, but what the Talmud says about the verse and what we can learn, we can deduce, and what we can, how we can alter our lives or shape our lives based upon this verse. It's actually 2 verses, but we'll read really one. This is chapter 10, verse 12 of Devarim. And of course, up to this point in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, we have the last will and testament of Moses. Moses is exactly, I think, 37 days from his passing. He gathers the entire nation. They are in the plains of Moab, in the Arvos Moab. They're right across the Jordan, looking at the city of Jericho. They're about to conquer it. Of course, Moses tries everything he could to try to be allowed to cross over. He's not allowed to cross over. He's going to die. He's going to pass. He's going to be buried on the east bank of the Jordan. Joshua is going to lead the conquest. But Moshe gathers the nation and gives them his final parting thoughts, guidance, a little bit of admonition, a little bit of rebuke, a little bit of chastisement, a little bit of looking to the past, but mostly looking towards the future to guide them how they're supposed to live. And the one thing, by the way, that he warns them more than anything else is the idea of idolatry. To not descend to idolatry, you're going into a neighborhood that is swimming in idolatry. Don't make the mistake of adopting their practices. Don't make the mistake of following their deities. Don't descend to paganism. You have to destroy it wherever you find it. Destroy their temples, destroy their idols, destroy their trees that they used to worship. Uproot idolatry from the land, and then you'll flourish. And of course, we know the history. They didn't exactly do it as planned, and eventually they were kicked out 850 years after they entered. And they came back, and they kicked out again. Hopefully now that the Jewish people once again have regained sovereignty over the land, hopefully those lessons of history will be learned, and the same mistakes will not be repeated. But there's a verse that Moshe, it seems like, if you read the beginning of the verse, it seems like Moshe is trying to give the nation an idea or a codified, cogent, succinct version of what God wants of us. I think the question of what does God want of us is really the most important question we have to ask. Because once you accept the fact that God created the world and created us, that means that we matter, and we have a purpose, and we have a function, and we have a mission. It's almost as if the idea of God, once that's accepted, it necessitates the idea of Torah, or the concept of God conveying what he wants, of us being able to piece together the puzzle of what we're living for. Because if God created us, then there obviously is a purpose. We're living for something. What is that thing? Of course, that should be the quest of every believer. If you say, we're just a bunch of random atoms, and we happen to have been cobbled together by luck or by chance, right? Once you say that, then life doesn't really have any meaning. There's no purpose, there's no goal. Have as much fun as you can before your time expires. But once you suppose that you were created by a higher intelligence, obviously there's a purpose, there's a reason why you're created, why are you here for? And we believe that that's contained in the Torah. But the Torah has a lot of details. 304,805 letters. A lot of details. What's the bottom line? What's the one sentence that incorporates everything? What's the overarching idea? What's the real mission? Simplify it for me, Rabbi. Give me the dumbed down version. Give me Torah for idiots. Give me the idiot's guide for Torah, Torah for dummies. What's the Torah for dummies? That's what Moshe seems to be telling us. The verse begins as follows. Again, chapter 10, verse 12. Moshe tells the Jewish people, V'ata, and now Yisrael, and now, O Israel, what does Hashem, your God, ask of you? What does God want of you? God created you. God sustains you. God loves you. God cares about you. You matter. But you have a role. You have a role to play. There is a role that you have as a person who has free will, as a person who has some levers at his or her disposal. There's something you have to do. There's a role that you have to play. You're given some sort of responsibility. This question is not given of God to animals. What does God want of animals? What does God want of my dog? The dog doesn't have free will. And therefore, the dog is programmed to behave in a certain way. They have the guidelines. Yes, some dogs are a little bit more ebullient than others. Some dogs are a little bit more melancholical. Every dog has a personality, but again, there is rigidity, there is a fixed nature to the dog. Humans, we have a role to play. We're partners with God. God's saying, I did 98% of the work, but I have something that you need to do. You need to finish the job. You need to complete what I started. Okay, it's a very powerful idea, but it's logically, it's necessary logically if you understand or accept the precepts that preceded it. What does God want of us? What's that 2%? What's that maybe 1% or maybe 0.01% of the role that we're supposed to play in completing creation, in partnering with God? Tiyim. Only one thing. Or at least that's what it seems like. If you only read the beginning of the verse, you're like, get so excited. Oh my goodness, I'm finally going to find the answer. Oh, what's the one thing that God wants of me? And then Moses tells them, well, to fear God, to go in God's ways, to love God, and to worship God with all your hearts, with all your soul, and to do all the mitzvahs. So it seems like this is a bait and switch, right? The classical bait and switch. Moses gathers the people. Oh, okay, we've been talking for so long. It's been 40 years since we've been started this project of trying to decipher Torah. I'll give you the bottom line. I'll give you the distilled version of what God really wants. And he says, well, love God, fear God, go in God's ways, worship God with all your heart, with all your soul, and do all the mitzvahs. It seems like the answer does not fit the question. Moreover, the question itself is almost a theologically problematic question. Why? We don't believe that there could be hierarchy in Torah. If Torah is from God, this verse and this verse they're both from God, and therefore they both have to be accorded with the same reverence and the same importance, because after all, this is the will of God. This is the will of God. So the idea of assigning hierarchy, of saying this is really important, this is what God really wants, everything else God doesn't want of us, seems bizarre. You can't really suggest that. You can't say that this mitzvah matters, this mitzvah doesn't matter, because if this mitzvah, if both of them came from God, that's really all that matters. He wants this, he wants that. How could we say that this really matters and that one doesn't? In fact, there's a whole host of sources, a bevy of sources that talk about the fact that we're not even allowed to say this mitzvah matters, or this Torah portion matters. This one, not as important. Yeah, it also matters a little bit. We're not supposed to do that because, of course, if it's from God, we cannot distinguish between what we assume is important and what we assume is not important. In fact, last week's parsha begins, it shall be on the heels of you observing the mitzvos, you'll get all the blessings. Says Rashi, what does it mean on the heels of you observing the mitzvos? It means the mitzvos, the people tend to trample upon with their heels. We assign hierarchy. We say some mitzvahs matter, some mitzvahs, not so important, we could trample upon it. That's a mistake. if it's all from God. We can't trample on it, and therefore specifically the ones that you think are not so important, God says, oh, if you do that, you get all the blessings. And yet Moses seems to contradict himself. He says, well, these things matter. God wants this, to the exclusion of other things, seemingly. And it doesn't seem like he's telling us, hey, these matter, and the other ones don't matter. He doesn't seem to demote other things. He is propping up, he's highlighting four things, essentially: love God, fear God, go in God's ways, and worship God. He seems to be highlighting those, but he doesn't seem to say, well, everything else, the other 609 mitzvos, less important. So what is really going on in this verse? It's such a perplexing verse, and you see why the Talmud in all kinds of ways tries to unpack the message and build for us a Weltanschauung, a perspective, an overview, a worldview that can be derived from this verse. And I would say, as an aside, whenever there's a part of Torah that raises such immediate and such clear questions, you know you have an opportunity for something really profound. Because the second something raises so many questions, there's obviously something beneath the text. There's the subtext that really illuminates the message. Because if you don't understand it, okay, now you have an opportunity. The question actually is a portal to understanding the bigger picture, to understanding the overarching message. So the Talmud in two places addresses, to my knowledge, and maybe there's more, but two places that we'll talk about, the Talmud addresses this verse, and I think provides us really ground rules or guidance to how we're supposed to live based upon this verse. The first is in the book of Brachos, which is the first book in Talmud. Of 63 books, it's the first in order. Not only do we have all the books, we have the order. First one is Brachos. And it makes the following very provocative statement. Rabbi Hanina says, who's Rabbi Hanina? One of the sages of the Talmud. Appears in many places in Talmud. Rabbi Hanina makes the following statement. Everything is in the hands of heaven, with the exception of fear of heaven. Everything is predetermined by God, with the exception of fear of heaven. We talked about earlier, there's 98% that God, 2% that we have. Everything is in the 98%, or maybe 99.999%. What's in our hands? Fear of heaven. Which means two things. It means that fear of heaven is in our hands, but also means, this is maybe the deeper message, that everything that is in our hands falls under the category of fear of heaven. Right? Logically, those both statements have to be true based upon this statement of the Talmud. That fear of heaven is in our hands, meaning it's not predetermined by God as to whether or not we'll have fear of heaven. Whether we are righteous or wicked is in our hands, number one. Number two, whatever is in our hands, if you could prove that we do have free will in any given area, then that would obviously be something that is fear of heaven. As an aside, I'm doing a lot of asides today, so I apologize for that. The Talmud says everything elsewhere, there's another statement in the Talmud, everything is in the hands of heaven besides for whether you get a cold. Yeah. If you get a cold, it's in your hands. That's your decision. You should have worn a coat. What that means is that someone maintaining their health is a question of fear of heaven. These two Talmudic statements are not arguing. What they're saying is fear of heaven is in our hands, and everything that is in our hands is fear of heaven, and someone, whether or not they choose to take care of the tool that God gave them, namely their body, that's a question of fear of heaven. If you have fear of heaven, you'll realize everything you get from God is precious, is valuable, and worthy of your maintenance and your oversight. And if someone doesn't take care of their body, it shows a lack of fear of heaven. If you don't tend to your body, if you don't maintain what God gave you to be able to allow your soul to do its impact in the world, obviously you're lacking in fear of heaven. That's what Talmud's saying. Again, deep insight that we see in the Talmud. That's only the introduction. So Rabbi Hanina is telling us 2 points. He's telling us, again, everything is in the hands of heaven besides for fear of heaven. Everything that's in our hands is fear of heaven. And how does he prove, how does he substantiate this very audacious claim? He quotes our verse. How do I know that everything's in the hands of heaven besides fear of heaven? How do I know that? What's the evidence? Chapter 10, verse 12 of Deuteronomy, Va'ati Yisrael, Ma Hashem Hashem Imach. What does God ask of you? To fear him. That's it. So he almost like he stops the verse after the first clause, everything else is maybe something else. But the question of what does God want from us? What is that one thing that God wants from us? Fear of heaven. That's like a break in the verse, and that's one idea. It's one message. What does God want from us? Fear of heaven. Okay, so that's the first part of the Talmud. The second part of the Talmud tries to question that. Because when we read, what does God really want from us? What's the one thing he wants from us? It's only fear of heaven. Does that imply that fear of heaven is something very easy or very difficult? Seems like it's very easy. What does God want from you? Moses is like, hey, why are you guys complaining so much? What does God want from you? He wants one thing, fear of heaven, that's it. Simple. Says the Talmud, is fear of heaven really simple? Is that easy? Is that no big deal? Isn't it so hard? Seems like it's really hard. And as an aside, we may add, I guess the third aside, that there are many statements in the Talmud that talk about how difficult it is to fear heaven. For example, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is on his deathbed, and his students appear to him, and they say to him, give us a blessing, and he tells them, may your fear of heaven equal your fear of man. What did the rabbi say? Is he losing it? Is he going senile? Our fear of heaven should be much more than our fear of man. Why is he telling us that we should have parity between our fear of heaven and fear of man? And he says, no, I haven't lost my step. I haven't lost my fastball. Because if someone sins, they look to, they look fro, and they say, is anyone watching? And they ignore the fact that God's watching. And therefore, what he's in fact telling them is that if anyone does any sin in the world, they don't have fear of heaven. And if someone would have fear of heaven to the degree they have fear of another person, then they would never sin. So even the most basic, bare minimum of fear of heaven, where it only equals the fear of humanity, that's a very hard thing, because that would necessitate we would never sin. So is it an easy thing or is it a hard thing? It's a very hard thing. And Moses is like, no big deal. What does God want from you? He only wants fear of heaven, that's it. Fear of heaven's everything. Fear of heaven's very difficult. What is Moshe leading us on to think that this is really easy? And concludes the Talmud, actually, it is very easy. For Moses, who is talking to the nation, it's very easy. For Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students, for us, it's very hard. For Moses, from his vantage point, it's very easy. To him, it's very easy. Us, it's difficult. Him, it's easy. He gives an example. Suppose someone comes to your house and wants to borrow a gold vessel. Do you have a large gold vessel in your house? Is that an easy thing to have, or is that a hard thing to have? It's very expensive. It's very valuable. You probably don't have it. But if you do have it, then it's pretty easy to have it, because you have it already. But if you don't have it, then it's very hard to have it. What that means is that Moses, he had the gold vessel. And therefore to him, he looks at fear of heaven, no big deal, I have it. Doesn't everyone have it? It's easy. Everyone else who doesn't have the gold vessel, they say it's very hard. Thus concludes the Talmud. And again, it's not clear what this other wrinkle is, because it just threw in the other wrinkle. It says there's fear of heaven, and then there's the gold vessel. And if you have the gold vessel, you have the fear of heaven. And if you don't have the gold vessel, You don't have the fear of heaven. And the only thing that matters is the fear of heaven. Moses had the gold vessel, and therefore he had the fear of heaven. We don't have the gold vessel, and therefore it's so maddeningly difficult. But it doesn't show us what the gold vessel is. Thus, if we take the entire Talmud, the baseline, the takeaway of the Talmud, and the mystery of the Talmud, is that what it's telling us is that the only thing that matters is fear of heaven. Everything that matters is fear of heaven. Fear of heaven is very easy if you have the gold vessel. And therefore, what we would say is that the entire pursuit of our spiritual growth is to get the gold vessel. And the gold vessel gives you fear of heaven, and that's the goal. We're trying to make ourselves as much as we can, as much as we can emulate Moses. We should strive to emulate Moses. Moses had the gold vessel, and consequently, he had the fear of heaven, and we're aiming for that gold vessel. We want to get the gold vessel, whatever that is. And once we have it, it's very easy to have it. The fear of heaven naturally extends from the gold vessel, and once you have it, it's really easy, and it's like no big deal. What's the big deal to have fear of heaven?
But he was there. 40 days and 40 nights. He was up there.
Well, he earned his...
He had it.
Well, he didn't get it for free.
No.
If we were like Moses, we too will be able to go up to heaven. Which means going up to heaven is not what earned him, it's the result, it's not the cause. So where's the gold vessel? What's the gold vessel and how do we get it? Again, the Talmud just added another wrinkle. It's like the lowest level, or the what gives you the fear of heaven is the gold. You get the gold, and then the fear of heaven naturally extends from the gold. And that's really the goal. The goal is to have the fear of heaven, which is a manifestation of the gold. So what's going on here?
Is this something like we're responsible for formulating the vessel within us through mitzvah, through study, through musar, in making self-improvements? We develop this vessel, and it's the vessel of gold? I don't know. Right?
I would definitely agree with you. Everything that we're trying to do is to get that gold, or maybe like you're saying, to become.
Right. It might not be gold. Maybe it's
gold.
brass right now, but yeah. or stone.
Okay, so I that's a great point. What happens? How do we get gold? Where's the gold from?
Ground,
We get gold from the ground. What does gold look like when it comes from the ground?
like rock.
It's kind of refined. It's like rocks or stones
That's
embedded with veins, and you have to dig it out.
So that's an interesting point. Very interesting point. That even if you do have the gold, it's not a gold vessel. It's not a gold. It's not just a clean gold nugget. It's mixed with all kinds of other trash that you have to extract it. You have to polish it. You got to refine. You got to remove all the alloys that are in the imperfections. That's a rigorous process. Where in the Torah has there been a description of that? Anyone knows? Is there any description in the Torah of someone refining gold?
What about as gold tried in the fire?
It's about the dross.
A dross? I don't know. I've never heard that before. What is a dross?
Dross is it's the imperfections that are found in metals, and it's like so you heat metals.
It's all the leftover stuff. You gotta get rid
Yeah,
of.
you heat the metals to various heats, to get the specific metal that you're trying to get, and everything else comes out of it at that point. It either melts earlier and you drain it off, or your metal melts and leaves that in the dross.
So you're separating the two.
In the bottom.
Separating the two. Okay. So was there a description of that in the Torah that we know of?
The menorah was hard.
But the menorah, you start off with a block of gold. So, but you hammer it out of that one block of gold. Could you turn to chapter 4, verse 20 of Deuteronomy? Which is an easy, is that an easy number to remember or not? 420? I wasn't sure if anyone would get that. Okay. I guess it is easy. What does it say there?
But you, Hashem, has
Can't hear you.
But you, Hashem, has taken, and he brought you from the crucible of iron from Egypt to be for him a nation that is a heritage as he is his head.
So an iron crucible. What is an iron crucible?
That's the thing you refine gold in.
That's exactly what Rashi says.
That's that big, huge iron pot that they boil.
Exactly. Where you separate the gold from the dross. Did I say it correctly? I just looked a new word. Look at Rashi there says, in that verse, Rashi says that an iron crucible, a kur habarzel, is a tool, a vessel in which you purify gold. Now, and what that's telling us is that the Egyptian experience, the 210 years the Jewish people were in Egypt, was equivalent to the Jewish people being in an iron crucible, meaning that we were gold, but we had to refine ourselves, we had to perfect ourselves, we had to remove the contaminants. Once you remove the contaminants, you can be purified gold, and that was the constructive component of the Egyptian experience. But isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? The Talmud is telling us that our objective and everything that's in our hands is to make ourselves as much of a gold vessel that automatically has fear of heaven. Like Moses, he was the gold vessel, he had the gold vessel, and consequently, to him, fear of heaven was a natural extension of that identity. But isn't that interesting? And then we see that the verse maybe describes a similar process on a national level. And we should even suggest every child is born with a soul. Is there anything more golden than that? But we believe that the soul is not the only factor operating within us. There's all kinds of other stuff there. Like we have a body, for example. Body will be the contaminant to our soul. We also have the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, a contaminant to our soul. Maybe, again, we're speculating here. We have this Talmud here that to rely upon. Maybe the process of Torah, the process of change guided to us by Torah, is the process of cleaning away those contaminants, restoring the gold to its previous luster, uncovering the dormant soul within us. The soul does not need to be trained to fear God. It has it already. If you just ask a soul, do you have fear of God? Is that an easy thing or is that a hard thing? It's very easy for the soul. It's hard for us because we're not operating in isolation. Our soul's not operating in isolation. If it would, we'd be like Moses. Fear of heaven is natural. It's instinctive for the soul because the soul is the gold vessel. But we have all kinds of other things that are inhibiting us from accessing or from utilizing that soul in its intended way because we have all those things that we need to remove away, to cleanse away, to purify, to refine, and to be able to operate in the way that we were intended. And that's the challenge.
So were they refined in Egypt, or were they refined in the 4 years?
According to the verse, the Egyptian experience was the crucible. So I'm happy we're having this conversation because we're going in a tangent that I was not expecting. But no, I like it. We're friends here. This is we're trying to understand this together. We have where is the first mention of the Egyptian exile? So when's the Egyptian exile? Where is that mentioned first?
He tells
Oh,
Abraham
Abraham.
that you'll be strangers.
So is Abraham a good character? Is he a hero? Is he a villain in the story? Is there a greater hero than Abraham? Maybe Moses. That's the only one maybe vying for that role. So why would Abraham be told you'll be punished by have your kids being thrown into a 210-year prison, hell of Egypt? Why would Abraham be told that?
Well, see that it preceded, that precedes the great blessing that would come to his people.
Sure.
Nations, right?
But wouldn't it make sense? I say, hey, I'll give you 210 years of slavery. I'll bet you'll be rich when you come out. What does it even mean you'll be rich when you come out?
You're going to be rich because you have the gold, the vessel.
Exactly. What Abraham is being told by God is that, Abraham, you're the originator of this vision for humanity, for the world. That's correct. You're the one who's going to bring and oversee the ushering of the perfection of the world. You're the one who's at the helm of completing what God started. You're going to do the fixing of the world. You're the gold. Again, the only thing that we can effectuate is the fear of heaven. You got it. But there's maybe still imperfections, not necessarily with you as an individual, but in the nation that you're going to spawn. We see even Abraham, he's got a son named Ishmael. He's got all kinds of other sons. It's not yet totally cleansed. And therefore, God is telling him, not punishing him, he's rewarding him by being told, I'm going to make sure that the gold that you have is going to be polished and refined to be able to complete what you started. This is the bargain here. The bargain is you're going to oversee the nation you're going to father the nation that's going to complete and bring the world to its perfection. However, as a necessary precondition of that, you're going to have to become the gold. Thus, in effect, it was not possible for us to be the quote-unquote chosen people. Abraham fathering the nation that's going to bring the world to perfection, if not, or outside of the confines of this process of the iron crucible of Egypt. Those have to go together. And therefore, he's told, yes, you've been elevated to the stature of chosen people. However, as a necessary precondition, prerequisite of that happening, you're going to have the iron crucible, but you'll emerge with great wealth. You'll have that refined gold. You'll be ready for Torah afterwards. You'll be primed as a nation to complete what you as an individual began. Sorry, you had your hand up there earlier.
Yeah, I just want to mention that the golden vessel on the panel of the ark.
There's a lot of gold in the tabernacle. It's very valuable. It's very precious. It's very desirable.
Yeah, just the mention of this kind of golden vessel.
Yeah, and there might be more of an intimate connection that, when we see the ark and the tabernacle and all the gold vessels that are there, it's probably hinting at that same thing. It's not just, oh, it's shiny. It's yellow and shiny. It's nice. It's pretty. It's trying to remind us, maybe the lesson we're supposed to take home is that we too are supposed to create within ourselves like a tabernacle in your heart of being a contributor towards this process of changing the world. It's a very, very powerful idea. Just to complete this thought before we move on to the next Talmud on the subject, what does it mean, fear of heaven? We can maybe even say that maybe it's even half of our spiritual identity is fear of heaven. There's the love of God and it's fear of God. And those two are the two components of our relationship that we have with God. So fear of heaven obviously is a big subject, obviously. But on the most basic level, fear is aversion. It is guarding yourself from making a mistake. Like when someone gets fearful, they become hyper aware of danger. That's the basic of what fear is. On the most basic level, what this is telling us here in this Talmud is that just as someone is fearful of heights, or someone is fearful of large growling animals, or someone is fearful of accidents, of someone is fearful of danger, we are physiologically wired to avoid danger and pain and, God forbid, accidents. Similarly, we have to develop that on our spiritual components, on the spiritual half. We have to realize that just as our body has concerns and there are risks, it is vulnerable, it is in danger, and that should inspire us to be fearful, our soul operates in the same exact way. There are things that are dangerous, that are injurious to our soul. We call those things sin, or sins in general. Sins are things that are harmful for our soul. And why would someone not try to avoid things that are harmful and dangerous? Even animals want to avoid pain. Even animals don't do things that are self-destructive. So Moses is telling people, what's wrong with you? How come you don't have fear of heaven? It's so easy. Even animals know how to do things that are not harmful. Even animals know how to avoid danger. You're a human. Fear of heaven should be the easiest thing in the world. And the reason why it's not real for us, or the reason why there's still room for us to improve, is because we don't have the gold. What that means is that we don't have that soul connection. We don't have that identification as a soul. We don't realize that we really truly do exist in two different planes. We are a fusion of body and soul, and in fact, we're much more a soul than we are a body. I always say that the fact that the body, we think we have a body, we know that for sure. A soul, maybe we have one, we don't. That's what we think. Truth is, it's the exact opposite.
Without
Truth
a body,
is,
there's no soul.
well, no, there is a soul.
No,
Without
without your body, if you don't have a soul in there, you wouldn't have a body.
True. So the second you take away a soul, the
Right,
body
let's go.
is
Useless.
totally useless. So that we know, but we know it theoretically. We know it intellectually, maybe. It's a concept. But your body, my goodness, that's real. But is it really real?
Some would say it's an illusion.
Well, I see your handsome visage now, so it doesn't seem like it's an illusion to me. So what's the answer? So I always say that the Almighty kind of, he threw in these hints, like these reminders that to remind us of these things, but we have to try to kind of pick up on those messages. We know that your body is constantly recycling cells, like millions and billions of them a day. You're constantly recycling. And in fact, over the course of 7 years, there isn't a single cell that was present in the previous 7 years prior. You're a different person. So your entire body is not the same body that it was 7 years ago. So can you even say that you are a body when it's just this changing thing? It's changing host for your soul. But then I found something fascinating. The one cells that don't regenerate, it's your brain. So why would the Almighty do it like that? How come your brain's not regenerating? The brain cells are the same, which is why, by the way, brain injuries are so harmful, because you can't just grow new ones. You kind of have what you have. It's almost fixed. Everything else, you could fix it, because the Almighty just made this miracle that your body will just replicate, replace, upgrade, constantly refine and improve those cells. But it's a very dynamic system. Brain you can maybe change the myelin that surrounds every one of your brain cells. You could improve your intellect and whatever, but it's much more fixed on that plan. The answer is because that's really where your soul is harbored. That's who you truly are. That's really where your individuality is manifest. That's where your free will lies. And therefore, that's really who you are. That's maybe constant. You could change, but you can't swap. You can't totally replace. You could improve. You could degenerate, sadly. It's also possible. But that's really who you are. Everything else, that's the garment, so to speak, in which you are living. We don't have that message. Yeah, we know it's true, but again, that's the goal that we're trying to get. Once you have that goal, once you realize that you are a soul, it is as logical to not do a mitzvah, to not study Torah, to not obey the commandments, as it is to starve yourself. It doesn't make any sense. Even animals won't do it. Why? Because you're hungry. Your body needs food. If you don't do it, you're going to suffer. You're going to get weak. You're going to get delirious. Why would you want to do that? It doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't want to do it. Your body's telling you that you're crazy. I'm hungry. Feed me. Tend to my needs. It's as illogical to withhold spiritual food from your soul as it is to withhold physical food from your body. In fact, it's much more logical. That's what fear of heaven is. It's easy, says Moses. What does God really want from you? It's so simple. It's only fear of heaven. It's simple. Tend to your soul. Why don't we do it? Because we don't have that goal. We don't identify with our soul. To us, the soul, yeah, it's like a theoretical thing that does it exist? Does it not exist? I don't know. Seems like there's good evidence, but have you seen one? But we have all these doubts. Or we could have it. The world that currently exists can tolerate those doubts and those questions. And as we spoke about last time, all above, the exact opposite is true. Do we have a body? Is that true? Do you have any evidence for that? The same relationship that we have body-soul today is flipped around in Olam Haba. Your soul is dominant. Your soul is visceral. Your soul is sensory. Do you even have a body? I don't know. Do I? I always give the example. If this is the example the Talmud gives, though it's modernized. Suppose someone is having abdominal surgery. And once they open up the whole cavity, they're like, looking around, see what's going on over here. Oh, they have an appendix. Let's just take off their appendix. Let's just do them appendectomy. What do we have to lose, right? What do we have to lose? So we're there, we're dealing with the colon, whatever, but we just take off the appendix for good measure, right? Okay. So the patient wakes up from their anesthesia and we give them a little bit of water and we see if they can walk around and right, they're trying to rehabilitate. And we say to them, okay, can you tell if you have an appendage or not? Can you feel it? Would the patient be able to identify whether or not they have an appendage or not? Why not? Because it's something which is so deep within you, you don't have the senses to determine whether or not you have it or not. So if your stomach hurts, it hurts, but it's like kind of like a general thing. You don't think about it really. You know you have a colon, you know you have intestines, you know you have an appendix. You can't really feel it. Says the Talmud. Hopefully not, right? Says the Talmud. When someone is born, their soul goes to their innards, goes to the inner sanctums of their stomach. That's what it says. What that means is, before you're born, your soul is your identity. Who you are is a soul. The fact that you have a body as well, it's a sideshow. Once you're born, it gets flipped around. Your soul becomes as visceral to you as your appendix. Do I have one? Do I not have one? I can't really even tell. And that's the challenge. That's why we don't have the goal. That's why we don't have the fear of heaven. That's why we behave in ways that are irrational. Because we ignore the part of us that really matters. The soul can be conveniently ignored. Do we even have it? Can you prove it? Do you know you have an appendix? Can you feel it? All about everything's flipped on its head. Do you have a body? Have you seen it? Do you have proof? Is there evidence? Says the Talmud. What happens in Olam Haba? There's no eating, there's no drinking. It doesn't say there's no body. There's no eating, there's no drinking. Because you're so connected to your soul, that's all you could perceive. You don't have any senses of your body. You don't even know if it exists. Is it real? Is it not real? You don't eat, you don't drink. Those things don't resonate. Those things don't matter in Olam Haba, in the soul first world.
So it's like happened to
Moses goes up to the mountain, doesn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. According to my opinion, my theory is he doesn't eat ever afterwards. The verse says explicitly that he doesn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. Multiple times it says it, because he goes up 3 times to the mountain, to heaven, to the other realm. First time to get the first set of tablets. Second time to guarantee that God's not going to destroy the nation. Third time to get the second tablets, or to get the second tablets inscribed. That was last parasha. And he mentions that he doesn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. The Rambam seems to indicate that he doesn't eat any time subsequently. The final 40 years, he's not eating at all. He's existing as an angel. Of course, his face is masked. He's not interacting in a human way, because there is no, his soul is no longer residing in his innards. His soul is now in his face. It's present. It's the way it was prior. He's restored the reality where the soul is what matters and the body's the afterthought. He's got the gold. And therefore he says to the nation, what's wrong with you? His reality in his worldview is like, this is so easy. It's so natural. You don't need to overcome anything. In the way he was oriented, he had the gold, and therefore to him fear of heaven was not something that was even a challenge. It's an amazing idea. Again, one line in Talmud, and a whole worldview about what Torah is there to do for us, who we really are as a nation, like what we are as a species. What is the challenge that lies beneath the conflict of life? What is the tension, body and soul? The malleability of that. We could become like a soul. We could become like Moses, to the degree that we do refine ourselves. We have the gold. We have the fear of heaven as a natural extension. Yeah, a very powerful verse. But the Talmud reveals the very deep insight that what does God really want from us? What is the extent of our ability to change? And everything that is within our ability to change is within that extent of a fear of heaven, which is a byproduct of the gold. And all of Torah is to get us to live more as a soul, less as a body. And to kind of change the ratio of our existence, our identification, as a body vis-a-vis versus as a soul.
You have the ivy ore overcome the olive
To have the what?
ore. Or
Oh,
light
or skin?
skin. To have the light.
Interesting. See, you know a lot of Hebrew. You have to speak. You have to translate for the audience.
I'm sorry.
The word "or" can mean, depending on how it's spelled. Is that what you're saying?
Ayin.
With an ayin, it means skin. With an aleph, it means light.
But Adam was, in essence, that before God gave him skin.
Sure. Yes.
But now that we
Or leather garments.
right,
Whatever that means.
No.
2 opinions in the Talmud.
right, it could be either one.
Either one's fine.
So what gets me about what you're saying is really our whole goal, vis-a-vis the fear of heaven, is we're attempting to become what we really are supposed to be.
What we really are.
Right, right. But we don't recognize it.
Exactly.
So the first step is realizing we have a soul. That's the hard part for most people. That I am a soul.
Well, okay. You just said 2 different things. I have a soul and I am a soul. Right? I have a soul is the beginning. I am a soul.
Is the next level.
And the next level is, the highest level is, I live as a soul. I exist as a soul. I sense as a soul. I covet as a soul. My agenda is the agenda of a soul. My pursuits, my desire, my ambitions are that of the soul. My world is the world of the soul.
Good lesson.
Just a quick question. So is that, in the idea of Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, is this a development of the Yetzer Tov that will lead us to identifying ourselves as a soul?
Well, it's a complicated question you just asked. What I'll tell you is like this. A man is body and soul. Into that mix is the Yetzer Hara. So the Yetzer Hara is a factor. It's not a part of the person's essence. The ratio of body and soul can change. So that's not a fixed breakdown. And the Yetzer Hara is trying to militarize the body to amplify its role and what role it plays in the collective identity of man. As to what exactly the Yetzer Tov is and how it helps man on the other side is a great mystery. And like I mentioned in the past here, there is a dearth of Talmud about the Yetzer Tov, whereas there's an abundance of Talmudic guidance vis-a-vis the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, which brings us to the conclusion that it's probably something which is a little bit more difficult to pin down to what it is. There are some who suggest that the Yetzer Tov is the soul. Others that say the Yetzer Tov is the intellect. But it's a long way of saying it's a very hard question to answer because there really isn't a lot of data that we're given to navigate that question. But yes, I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
Out of line to say that if we can take the negative energy, let's speak up, please. Take the negative energy that is directed at us and learn how to deflect it, recharge it, whatever term you want to use, and turn it into positive energy.
That's a very good idea. Yes. If we can figure out how to do that, that would be great. Talmud says that it's doable.
More in prayers. We can make it subservient.
That's not what he's saying. Again, there's technicalities. We could suppress it. We could convert it. You're talking about conversion therapy.
Conversion, that is big important.
The Talmud says that Abraham and David both neutralized their Yetzer Hara.
If it wasn't possible, we wouldn't be encouraged to try to do it.
Right. But Abraham and David both did it. They both neutralized the Yetzer Hara, but they did it in different ways. Abraham converted it into being good. David executed it. He killed it. That's what the Talmud says. Both of them got rid of it, but the net result is that David had only a good inclination. His evil inclination was destroyed. How he did that, again, another question. Abraham resulted that he had a good inclination. That was always a good inclination. And he had a good inclination that used to be a bad inclination, but now became good. So he managed a way to kind of use the power of the Yetzer Hara for a good end.
When in David's,
How he did that, you have to wait for my book to be published.
when in David's life did he kill him?
Shameless plug again.
Huh?
When in his life, David's life, did he kill him?
It doesn't say, but it quotes a verse in Psalms that talks about my heart is hollow within me. That's where it's hinted. My heart is hollow within me. That's where it hints at David's transformation. The fact that his heart, which is a reference to his desires, and very frequently is used as a description of the Yetzer, of the inclination. For example, we say you should love God with all your hearts. It doesn't say with all your heart. It says with all your hearts. In Hebrew, it says with all your hearts. When they translate it, you lose that nuance. Because you say with all your hearts, it comes out the squiggly line under it, right? Microsoft Word is like, that's not a word. You only have one heart. You can't love with all your hearts. Okay, with all your heart. Okay. Fine. Take away the squiggly line. But it says with all your hearts. I wonder how they translate it in... if they're more precise, they'll use with all your hearts. Do we have that Rashi commentary? I wonder how they translate it there.
Top shelf to the left.
Let's see how clever they are in this. Because Rashi says, with all your hearts, that is with your good heart, your bad heart. This is riveting, I know, to watch me try to find those places.
That you even know what book to go to.
Okay, you shall love.
Sorry.
You shall love Hashem your God with all your heart. Doesn't say with all your hearts. I translate it with all your hearts. That's the correct translation. She says you have two hearts. You have the good heart, you got the bad heart. You got to love God with both your hearts. How do you love God with your bad heart? You got to find a way to do it. Either by maybe suppressing it, struggling with it. That's one way to say. Or maybe by upgrading it, by converting it. Yeah. I want to quickly just mention some of the other statements that the Talmud says from this verse. Again, there's a lot to work on now. It's not like we don't have anything to take home with us. But the Talmud also says that we have to make 100 blessings every day. What's the source of that? What's the Hebrew word for 100, Leslie? 100 word. 100. What's the number for 100?
Mea.
Mea. That's right. Yes. Elef is 1,000. Yes. 100 is Mea. The verse says, Ma Hashem Elokecha Shalom Yomach. Ma means what? Says the Talmud, Ma, you can also read it as Mea. Maybe you got to only add one letter. Ma, Mea, 100 verses. 100 blessings every day. That's what the Talmud says. Some of the commentaries say you count the amount of letters in the verse, 100 letters in the verse. And it's hinting at the fact you have to make 100 blessings a day. Okay, that's a subject for a different discussion. And there's maybe more, but I think we definitely have an entire worldview based upon 5 words. What does God want from us? To fear Him. That's it. That's it. It's an easy thing, maybe. It could be an easy thing. Yeah, the gold, sure, no big deal. But that's a very, again, a succinct answer to the question of what really is Torah all about. Torah is the guidance for us to get the gold, and the gold is there for us to have the fear of heaven, and that's all within our capacity. We can do it, and everything we can do is included within it. This was an absolute joy. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any questions.